The content of this episode reflects my personal experiences, opinions, and perspectives regarding events that occurred during my time in the Student Association and beyond. All statements are based on my understanding and recollection of those events. This episode is not intended to defame, slander, or harm anyone mentioned. Any opinions expressed are my own and do not represent the views of any organization or institution. Out of respect for the individuals involved, I will not directly name anyone who did not provide consent to be mentioned. Instead, I will refer to them by their titles, roles, or statuses. This was a highly publicized situation that negatively impacted my reputation and mental health. After months of processing, reconciling, and reflecting, I felt it was time to share my side of the story and to mark my comeback. Enjoy and Happy New Year.
Blace Podcast. The Blace Podcast.
The Blace Podcast. The Blace Podcast. The Blace Podcast. Hello, everyone. It's Caleb Sapp, host of the Blace Podcast. It's been a while, and I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me today in my space of the internet. And depending on when you're listening to this, Happy New Year. This is a different type of show today. Let's shed the old background music of yesteryear, and let's focus on a story. Now, if you watched the previous episodes of Season 4, 2024 was supposed to be a big year for my company, ByBlace. Instead, I decided to focus on the Student Association, and the business fizzled out in March. So, what better way to revive this wonderful podcast than to tell a story based on a simple question? What do you do when the institution you gave everything to leaves you with nothing? This is a story of true trial and tribulation, a fight for liberation that culminated in the unraveling of a hard-earned reputation. It's a story of blessings cloaked in betrayal, of lessons learned through sacrifice and resilience. I hope it serves as a cautionary tale for anyone who pours their heart, soul, and ambition into an institution only to face the bittersweet realities of loyalty and friendship. For context, I suggest you listen to Season 2, Episode 7 of the Blace Podcast first, for my early beginnings in the Student Association, and then listen to the Season 4 premiere episode for all of my success in the fall of 2023. If not, or you have already, let's get started. Going into January of 2024, my focus was set on closing out my junior year with an upcoming spring 2024 semester and following through with my rebrand of Blace candles into ByBlace. I released commercial after commercial and even released 3 episodes of the pod in longer formats. Renovating a key figment of my past was no match for the steam engine barreling down the tracks. That was the goals I had planned for the Student Association. Events, new promotions, enhancements, and cross-branch collaboration. As the semester commenced, I began immersing myself in the pride of my position. I did Student Association outreach programs and toured the campus with the Student Association. Over time, I forgot about my plans for ByBlace, and the website was shut down in March. I decided that the work I was doing was influencing campus culture, and most importantly, bringing people together. It was something I truly fell in love with doing, and the way my goals manifested into action was truly remarkable. I became acclimated with the members of the association through event and promotion collaboration, placing several student organizations, our student press, and almost every branch onto several video boards and posters, much of it on my own will and beyond the initial goals for my position. While I would enjoy reminiscing on my accomplishments, let's set all of that aside for now. The Senate elections have brought a fresh face into my life. For the sake of his right to privacy, I will refrain from using their name in this episode. When a job vacancy in the branch was opened, I invited them into the position so we could do good work together. After they got in, it was so great to see the light they brought into the Student Association. And we often got to make our report to the Senate adjacent to one another. But their first report they made set the stage for a conflict that would lead to the end of this friendship. Despite frequent visits to my roommate, Jalen, which would range from streaming newly released albums to hours-long Monopoly games, one of the most culturally significant issues of our generation became a wedge issue between us. My views changed as the Israel-Hamas war raged on in the Middle East, and being a staunch Biden supporter made it hard for me to acclimate with the Students for Justice in Palestine, also known as SJP. My clashes with other left-leaning students seeped their way into their group chat, where I was often labeled a fraud and a hypocrite, and even worse, had my language called racist for calling Hamas terrorists and savages. I was devastated when I saw the bloody images from October 7th, just as I was devastated from seeing the horrors unfolding across the state of Palestine. My deep dives into the subject and across the online chatter of the topic had helped me form the best position on the war that I eventually settled with: peace on both sides. Activists are passionate about their cause. It's what makes them activists. They want to make change in the world. Something was unique about the activists during this war. Never during the Black Lives Matter protests did I hear a group of activists collectively debating on calling themselves activists, in preference to the labels of comrade or as the Intifada. These words hold historical meaning, but once again, this episode is not a history lesson. My friend became immersed more and more into the pro-Palestinian movement at UAlbany, while I was instructed by my branch leaders to stay at the water level professionally when it came to my position at the Student Association. Being a member of the SJP, I saw a dark undercurrent bubbling up to the surface on occasion. Violent rhetoric about Israelis, aspiring e-board members calling for the complete and utter destruction of an entire country and its dense cities, justifying October 7th and further slaughter of civilians as a means to liberation, and even worse, targeting Jewish and Israeli students and their organizations on campus. When I'm asked what made me stay for so long within the movement, it was because I would genuinely feel for this movement. I was trying my hardest through my positions, through numerous organizations, to amplify the Palestinian cause. And repeatedly I was labeled a fraud and a phony. And combined with the offensive nature of their content, I had no other choice but to leave the movement eventually. At a Senate meeting for the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Resolution, many supporters and some opponents attended, divided along the binary of arguments surrounding Israel. Supporters of the country argued that the Student Association was ignoring the growing anti-Semitism threat on campus, while dissenters of the country argued that the Palestinian deaths demanded action by the Student Association. It was an emotional meeting, and I shook hands with crying Jewish students in the public forum and thanked them for coming, while wearing a Palestine pin given to me by one of the old directors who was leading the pro-Palestinian activists. They later pulled me aside and accosted me for shaking the hands of genocide supporters and urged me to pick a side. My friend texted me the morning after, repeating the criticism, and began to air out my presence on Yik Yak that was only known to him at the time. After a text argument, we ceased contact, and that meeting was the last time we had ever spoke face to face. My friend was gone. But the coworker remained, and I continued to support the Palestinian cause, including his fundraising event for it. I plastered promotions for it all over the campus center and shared it on social media. And I attended the event with my roommate turned friend, Jalen. Along with that, me and Jalen marched near the front of SJP's largest protest in the UAlbany Uptown campus and attended another march on the New York State Capitol in downtown Albany. Through my other organizations, like the College Democrats, I wrote impactful statements applauding pro-Palestinian activists on college campuses and emphasized their goals as a movement. I thought I had reached the peak of my activism, but I sealed the deal by posting the BDS resolution and a statement condemning Islamophobia and anti-Semitism equally, which reached thousands of people through the Student Association Instagram page. Now let's zoom out really quickly. The tale of betrayal could probably be complete by now. The old friend went on to join on attacks against me in the SJP group chat and began spreading lies about me being an undercover Zionist. He even outright defended Hamas. But this next part is what we call in the story the rising action. It was April, and a suspected attempt at a bonding exercise, our president had made me and him the campaign managers for his re-election. This was against the backdrop of everything else that was going on. Much of it, the president was aware about. My marketing prowess had promoted them to the masses via a campaign website and a social media, while the other assisted in video production. I led a mini campaign rally at the presidential debate, and the other assisted in canvassing. I was a rock star at canvassing, speaking with hundreds of people across campus within days. The campaign was dragged through the dirt by our opponents, being hit left and right with election complaints to the Elections Commission. In the end, we progressed to a runoff and won the final election by a pronounced majority. I was cited as the reason of their victory by the president himself and his vice president, and I was celebrated for it by others on their ticket. Over the course of the campaign, I grew closer with the president and the vice president, being invited into their home, attending their parties, and becoming a primary in their inner circle. I worked closest with the president, often moving my computer into his office when the vice president wasn't there. After a mediocre Park Fest and a troubling performance in my final exams, I received my lowest semester GPA in my UAlbany career, a 2.94. My candle business was gone, so I just took the time in the summer to recuperate and prepare for my Hawaii trip of a lifetime. During my trip to Hawaii, I was working on promotions for the next Student Association event off of a summer stipend that was awarded to me by the president, and I was aware that my old friend would be returning as a director. I knew I had to be the one to step in and stop it from happening, but I also knew that it was going to divide me and the president. The president was always so good at not making his views about the war a factor of his personality, unlike others. But his graphics he would hang up in his office would often depict the land seizures by Israel and posters for rallies for pro-Palestinian activists. Even with my doubts considered, I knew that unleashing a second semester of the old friend's problematic ideals was not going to be a good thing for the student body or marginalized communities, especially as his social media posts and rhetoric began to worsen and was criticized by other student association leaders. So, in the end, I decided it was the right thing to do to begin an attempt to block his nomination for the sake of others, not myself. Now, this is where things took an unexpected and ugly turn. The conflict escalated beyond anything I could have imagined, and what followed completely blindsided me. What I believed to be the right course of action unexpectedly placed me in such a precarious situation. The press misrepresented the situation, framing it as a referendum on pro-Palestinian activism rather than a discussion about someone's suitability for a critical role. To keep the focus on the actions and events, I'll refer to the person I once called a friend simply as the nominee. On Wednesday, August 28th, 2024, a week after my 21st birthday, I gave a speech celebrating my achievements to the Senate and was met with applause and cheers. The Senate chair, who I held high regard for, allowed me to use his podium to deliver my speech. My friend Jalen, who was a mutual friend at the time, sent me a startling text. The nominee, who was in the audience at the time, had posted a picture of me in the Senate chair onto his Instagram story with a red triangle placed over my head. It confirmed my worst fears about him. And when Jalen showed me afterward, I screenshotted it and I reported it in an email along with other problematic text messages sent by him during his directorship to the entire Senate body on Friday. Why did I take that step? Because I knew that time was running out. The nominee was set to be confirmed at the next Senate meeting, and there was no mechanism in place across any of the branches to hold someone accountable otherwise. I also knew deep down that raising my concerns directly with the president would lead nowhere. He had been watching the situation unfold from the start and showed no inclination to reconsider his stance. The email was my only viable option, a discreet way to address my concerns without resorting to the theatrics of social media, as others had. When I pressed send, I wasn't alone. A senator, who at the time was advocating fiercely for Jewish voices to be heard, stood by me in solidarity. Together, we hoped to ensure that the Senate had the information it needed to make a fully informed decision. While I didn't attach the president to the email, it was forwarded to all Student Association members by Monday, which was the first event of the year for SA. On Saturday, the nominee responded to my email, doubling down on his actions and rhetoric with justifications for violence and a threat to reveal my true character. To which I responded to, re-emphasizing my concerns for the nominee on Sunday. As I was finishing up the last of my duties for the event on Sunday night, I received an email by the vice president notifying me that I was suspended from my position and was not allowed to assist in the event I was working on for months with them. I challenged the decision to the Supreme Court, but the suspension was lifted early after a brief meeting I had with the president and the vice president, who had already spoken to the nominee. I asked for grace for my rare disagreement with them concerning their nominee, and I was met with resistance by them to pull his nomination due to pressures from student organizations who had supported them in their re-election campaign. In the following Senate meeting on September 4th, me and the nominee addressed the emails in the first in-person exchange we had since the BDS resolution meeting. It was tame, with minimal conflict, and his nomination was tabled to the next week's meeting on September 18th. In the lead up to that day, I was hearing from many senators, leaders in the branches, and students rejecting the rhetoric by the nominee and assuring me that they would vote no if the option is presented to them. Nevertheless, September 18th will be a day I will never forget. It's the reason why I'm making this podcast episode. It's the reason why this episode is focused on betrayal. It's the climax of a story that spanned 2 semesters, a summer period, that occurred in person and online, in front of the public and behind closed doors. It's the loss of a job, friends, confidants, and a respect for the institution I sought to benefit. On the morning of September 18th, I invited over a friend of mine that was Jewish to my apartment to brief her on the situation. It was also the day my new roommate moved into my suite. It was a sunny day, so I wore all green in short sleeves and cargo shorts. I had my hair in a new hairstyle I was trying, with bangs in the front and a bun in the back. I was scrolling through Instagram during my first class of the day, and there it was, an SJP post promoting attendance to the Senate meeting that night to support the nominee. The post was then reshared by the president and vice president. Out of fear for intimidation, I sent another email to the Senate, this time to new members who were being sworn in that day, to read the previous exchanges and to not be swayed by the threat of intimidation. After last-minute preparations with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in his office, I headed up to the Senate meeting. The mood was tense as I entered the room to a mob of people from SJP, one holding a drum. I saw many acquaintances that I had met through the nominee, but this time they were completely against me. I sat in the far left seat of the room, out of irony, and due to the order chosen by the Senate chair, I was due to speak last. For what felt like hours, several people stood up to deliver soliloquies supporting the nominee, while weaving into their arguments several insulting allegations against me, with the same person who first told me to pick a side in the BDS resolution hearing, saying that I was not and will never be welcome in their pro-Palestinian movement. Others proceeded to call me anti-Semitic, racist, a liar, and coined a collective joke about my alleged use of ChatGPT in my emails. I chuckled at some of the jokes they were making because I kind of forgot that it was a Senate meeting. After each remark, the drummer hit his drum in agreement, which wasn't even allowed in the Code of Conduct, but we love mob rule. Then, the microphone was passed to me. I was angry, but I was sent a text message by the Senate chair telling me to keep it cool, and that's exactly what I did. I slammed their remarks as misleading the public and highlighted the greatest hits of offensive content that was shared by the nominee and the organization. Jewish members of the Senate made me aware that they appreciated the sentiments I was sharing and commended the nuance of my arguments. After the president and vice president spoke, with the VP condemning my emails as misinformation, I walked out of the Senate meeting to cry in a bathroom while watching the live stream of the meeting. Then, on the live stream, I heard my nomination to be called for consideration. I ran back in the room with sunglasses on and made my way to the front of the room to begin questioning. It was one of the hardest things I had to do. It isn't easy to get up in front of a bunch of people who were just insulting you and stand next to the two leaders you believed in so strongly who had seemingly picked their side in the matter. With a few new senators following along with the vitriol, the president was asked if he would vote yes for my nomination as a senator. His answer was a no. When I heard the answer, I began staring at my name on the nomination bill behind me, and I was crying underneath my sunglasses. After a kind senator allowed me to respond to the president, I called out my loyalty to the man and expressed my shock. After that response, I blacked out until questioning was over, and I placed the microphone on the Senate chair's podium gently and ran out of the room. Few allies of mine accompanied me in this random corridor across the hall from the meeting, and my nomination was voted down by a reverse margin that ended up confirming the nominee to his position. After the vote was concluded, I collected my things from the office and returned to my apartment alone. It was late, and I left my mom a voicemail telling her something bad happened and that I was returning home by train the next day. She ended up calling me back at 1 a.m, and I tearfully explained to her my humiliation and ousting. I had also received texts of support from many, including the vice president, which I felt was backhanded in the way it was delivered, with her professing that her and the president never wanted that to happen, but it quite literally happened because they allowed it. I had posted a mini statement on my story the next morning, which was liked by many of my SA allies and others I had met. After that, I went on a social media hiatus and began to cease contact with everyone from Student Association. I had felt completely alone, but I also felt I needed to be. Such a public humiliation and a trouncing of beliefs in unity and equal treatment and representation is something that could have broke people, including me. It was a betrayal by my leadership, which credited me for their re-election and had welcomed me into their home. It was a turning point for an association that was on the precipice of greatness. I genuinely believe that if September 18th had occurred in an opposite fashion, the Student Association would have had a successful semester. But forget about alternate realities. By October, I went on to serve e-board positions in the College Democrats and the UAlbany chapter of the American Marketing Association. I used my video production skills in both organizations, but mainly the Democrats, with a new TV program that focused on politics and student engagement that reached well over 10,000 views. For the American Marketing Association, I channeled the speaking skills I learned with my report to the Senate to deliver class speaks and amass hundreds of members into our club group chat. I was also invited by the Mastery School of Business to speak at a student marketing panel about my experience with the Student Association. During this time, I found myself with the opportunity to reconnect with friends and form new bonds. Two of them, old friends from the Student Association, became a meaningful part of my journey, and I was grateful to welcome them into my inner circle. I wasn't going to let such a tough situation stop me from finding joy and connection with others. I even went with Jalen to Dippy Fest, the last event at Dippy Kill Wilderness Retreat before it closed, and was even asked by the vice president to monitor a bus to the venue because volunteers didn't show up. I also obtained a sweet internship for website design through the AMA that I'll get college credit for. Eventually, I began to return to the Student Association office to hang out as a newly appointed Supreme Court intern to the Chief Justice. After successfully redeeming myself and repairing my image in the public eye, I returned to the Senate meeting room for the first time in months on November 13th, 2024. I delivered a public comment that marked 2 months since that fateful day in September, and I criticized the lack of leadership and events put on by the executive branch and the closure of the Dippy Kill Wilderness Retreat, and condemned their push for socialism and third-party voting that did not help against the shift to the right seen in the New York electorate. That same day, the Albany Student Press published an article detailing the Dippy Kill closure, which sparked an uproar against the president by the Student Association alumni. I even reposted their open letter against the president. Eventually, the Student Association received a 6% approval rating on Yik Yak in a poll of more than 600 voters near the end of the semester. On December 9th, the Student Association Instagram, which I directed tens of thousands of people over to in the course of my directorship, was permanently banned. I even tried to assist the vice president in getting the account back, but I was being falsely accused by the nominee turned director of being behind the takedown in retaliation for the Senate appointing my successors by the end of the semester. What made that accusation so laughable was that I wrote thorough transition binders for both of them, despite not being asked to do that. I genuinely wanted them to succeed for the institution's sake. To close out this chapter of my life, I want us to do a quick recap of the story. We went through the spring 2024 semester, which had a friendship fallout, the Palestine movement, and a student government election. And the fall 2024 semester had betrayals on several fronts, a comeback, and ultimately failure for the Student Association. On the academic side, I received my highest GPA in my UAlbany career with a 3.66 GPA, well beyond the Dean's List threshold, and solidified my cum laude status and paving the way for my graduation in the next semester. I never wished ill on the institution, but with my new perspective from the outside looking in, while also having insiders, I can say with confidence that nobody won from what happened on September 18th. It was truly a fateful day for the institution, its members, myself, and ultimately the student body. All throughout my directorship, my management of the re-election campaign, and the endeavors that followed my ouster, I had one group of people in mind, the student body. Who wins when leaders make poor decisions? Not the student body. Who wins when mobs feed lies to the public? Not the student body. But who wins when someone like me emerges from a tough situation by using their talents for other endeavors? The student body. So, as we reach the end of this journey together, I hope you're not left thirsting for more salacious details or sensational gossip. Instead, I hope you leave with a deeper realization. Everything is not always as it seems. What happened to me is a cautionary tale, but it's also a stark reminder that this can happen to anyone in today's world. When leaders lose sight of their purpose and focus on the wrong things, they risk setting an example that inspires division instead of unity, fear against courage, and selfishness instead of service. As human beings, we owe it to each other to embrace our imperfections, to lift up one another rather than tear each other down, to unite instead of divide, and to welcome others instead of casting them out. Looking back, I stand by the actions I took to uphold those beliefs. If given the chance, I would do it all over again. Because when you act with conviction and do what you know in your heart is right, not just for yourself, but for others, you should never regret it. That's the lesson I hope you take away. It's the moral of the story, and it's the moral of my story. And beyond that, it's a call to action for us all to be better, to lead with integrity, and to build a world where doing the right thing is always worth it. Thank you for joining me on this episode. I hope you all have a fantastic new year. And cheers to what is in store in 2025. God bless.